Everyone, Phil Graham here, creator of the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan. Welcome to our short presentation today called The Final Piece to Your Financial Plan. And I want everybody to think about something. If something were to happen to you yesterday, so you died yesterday, how would your family manage the expenses for today? Now, I know a lot of us have thoughts in our head on exactly what's going to happen. You've seen some of our other videos with funeral directors and estate planning attorneys talking about what really happens. But this is really important because for the majority of families, what they think or want is going to happen isn't actually what happens when they pass away. And for most people, they either don't have a plan at all. And a good friend of mine, Ed Slott, says not having a plan is actually a plan. It's you choosing the worst possible plan for your family, or your plan is not efficient or doesn't work the way you think. And we're going to talk about both of those things today. Now, if you have a plan, likely you're thinking about using life insurance, whether that's term life, universal whole life, final expense, even. A lot of people use final expense insurance to cover those expenses when you pass away. Money at the bank. You know, most people have checking accounts, savings accounts, CDs, money markets. And a lot of people will say, well, Phil, you know, I set up those accounts with transfer on death. So those are going to be available when I die. And I'm going to show you why that's not the case. Annuities, whether they're fixed annuities, variable, indexed, immediate, they're not going to work either. Investments, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, managed accounts, whatever it is, even if you set them up with transfer on death, they're not going to be immediately available. And power of attorney. We get a lot of people that say, well, Phil, you know, I have my son or daughter on my account as power of attorney. And what the majority of people do not realize is that power of attorney dies when you die and no longer works. And all these first options all require a death certificate in order for your family to access the money. In addition to a death certificate, they typically require some sort of claims process. So even that final expense plan that you bought specifically to cover your final expenses, the money's not going to be there immediately when your family needs it. It's going to take 30 to 45 days or longer in some situations. Now, even if you have a prepaid funeral, okay, we still have other expenses, whether it's travel expenses for your family that's out of town, could be celebration of life. Those can get really expensive because I know today a lot of the funerals are more about celebration than just burying or cremating somebody. There can be other mortgage bills, taxes, credit cards, other expenses that need to be covered before the estate is settled. And then the executor is going to have a tremendous amount of cost involved in settling your estate. And lastly, there can be a lot of additional funeral costs that weren't factored into that prepaid funeral. So we have to take all of that into consideration. And that's assuming that you've actually fully funded and prepaid for your funeral. But somebody's typically paying for all these expenses. Now, we talked about a death certificate that we can't start anything, whether it is filing a claim on your life insurance. We have to have a death certificate. Implementing your transfer on death or pass on death through one of your bank accounts or investment accounts. You can't start that without a death certificate. And if you happen to have a revocable or living trust, in order to put your successor trustee in place, you also need a death certificate. Now, this is from askafuneraldirector.com. We got this some time ago. The national average was 10 business days. That's over 2 weeks to get a certified copy of a death certificate. But just last week, I pulled this from the Texas Health and Human Services website. they're taking 20 to 25 business days. That's a month for online processing. Mail-in order is 65 to almost 90 days. And some states are even longer. So at the end of the day, we know it's going to be at least 2 weeks, but could be substantially longer. So we got to wait for the death certificate, right? Well, then someone has to pay for the funeral or cremation because there's no money in the estate that we can get to. So somebody's paying out of pocket. And that's where a lot of the problems come from. And here's a great example. Do you know who paid for Prince's funeral? Now, keep in mind, Prince died with a $400 million estate. $400 million estate. Now, we can talk about his lack of estate planning in a totally different presentation, but for this conversation, $400 million going to the family. Do you know who paid for Prince's funeral? Well, I hate to tell you, it was not his family because they didn't have any money and they couldn't get to it. It wasn't the state of Minnesota. The actor and comedian George Lopez gave Prince's family $20,000 to bury him. Why? Because they couldn't get to the money. So it doesn't matter how little or how much money you have, it has to be set up properly in advance to make sure your family can access money. Now, next, the executor has to settle the estate, and this can take 6 to 48 months. Unless you've personally settled an estate yourself, you may not realize how complicated this is. Because as the executor, you're having to find all the documents, work with the attorneys, get the death certificates. What's really interesting is the executor is also personally liable if something goes wrong settling the estate or the payment of taxes. So there's a lot of responsibility there. They got to advertise for potential creditors. They got to manage all the assets and liabilities, protect the property, hire appraiser. If there's businesses involved, they got to continue to run the business, pay your debts after you die. They're responsible legally to pay any reasonable funeral expenses or reimburse themselves, administrative fees, taxes, estate taxes, income taxes. It goes on and on. They have to distribute all your assets, keep accurate records, file a final report with the court, and they're entitled to compensation. And that needs to be accounted for in your will, your trust, or in your beneficiary liquidity plan that we're going to talk about as well. And then the inheritance is transferred to the beneficiaries, and that time is going to vary completely. But the bottom line is there's not going to be any money available for your family to use to pay for these expenses. So somebody's going to have to come out of pocket, and that causes stress, arguments, disagreements. And the sad part is the majority of the time there's money there. They just can't get to it. So before we talk about the solution, let's talk about what the expenses are. So the average funeral expense plus family expenses equals total expenses. So this is just generic. Some states are going to be more expensive. Some states are going to be less than other. But when you break it down, a traditional funeral is going to average about $15,000. Cremation is going to be considerably less, but these expenses can get up to $20,000, $25,000 depending on where you live and what services either your family or you picked out in advance. But it's substantial. Now, then additional family expenses can be, again, their travel expenses, celebration of life, a lot of the home expenses that don't end just because you passed away. And then the executor expenses as well, especially if your executor might live out of town. And these expenses can easily average upwards of $10,000 in addition to the cost of your funeral. And again, yours could be less, yours could be more, or you could be at the average. And what I like everybody to consider is, how would you give immediate access to your money, to your family, so they can manage these final expenses? And we already talked about the traditional ways that most people plan to do it. that unfortunately just don't work at the end of the day. Doesn't mean the family doesn't eventually get the money. They just don't get it immediately when they need it most. So that's where we came up with the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan. Now, what's great about the BLP is you're already leaving money to your beneficiaries. So if you don't have any assets, we're not creating inheritance for your family with the Beneficiary Liquidity Plan. What we do is we don't give them any less money and we don't give them any more inheritance. They get the same amount of inheritance whether you implement a Beneficiary Liquidity Plan or not. We simply provide your loved ones access to the predetermined dollar amount within 24 to 48 hours of your passing. And by having a BLP plan in place, we relieve the burden, allowing them access to money that they're inheriting anyways. And this is the secret sauce right here. By eliminating the death certificate requirement, we give them access 30 to 60 days faster because we don't have to wait for the death certificate. So that makes this truly the final piece to your financial or your estate plan. Now, here's the simple solution. We use money that you already have. You don't have to come up with any additional funds. Everybody loves that piece. You're not making premium payments. You're not buying more death benefit or more inheritance. It's the same amount of money that you were planning on leaving. We can allocate a minimum of $2,500 up to $100,000 to your plan. The money grows tax deferred and passes tax free to your named beneficiaries. And again, secret sauce, death benefit is paid out in 24 to 48 hours without a death certificate, except in the states of Indiana, Kentucky, Louisiana, Massachusetts, and New York. And I love this part. As long as you're not 100 years old, so 99 or younger, regardless of your health, you can qualify. Your plan can be set up in less than 15 minutes over the phone or in person, and you get your plan documents within a week along with the claim forms for your family. It's super simple because it's already your money. We move it from your left pocket to your right pocket to put the plan in place so that on the worst day of your family's life, the day you pass away, it's not a burden. Now, I know what you're thinking, or you might be thinking, well, Phil, how and why does this work? Well, we take monies that you already have. Now, it could be a savings account, checking account, existing cash value life insurance, CDs, money markets, annuities, any kind of investments or money that you already have. And we're going to allocate a portion of that inheritance, money you've already earmarked for your family, money that you already want to be protected for them. And we're going to use a single premium guaranteed issue whole life insurance contract with a 100-year-old A-rated mutual insurance company, and we assign it to a free irrevocable trust. And all this is done on less than 4 pages and takes less than 15 minutes. But by building the plan this way, we eliminate the need for the death certificate. We protect the asset from creditors. We make sure it's there when your family needs it most. So by setting it up this way, it's available in 48 hours or less. The claim form can go to any funeral home or crematory. And I'm going to show you exactly what that looks like, because that's how we know that you passed away. So again, here's the claim form. It's this simple. Your family takes this to any funeral home or crematory that you ultimately end up in. And the funeral director is going to sign off that you passed away. That's what we use for proof of death. They're then going to attach a receipt for goods and services they provided. And in this example, we had $25,000 allocated to your beneficiary liquidity plan. Your funeral cost $15,000. Now, as a checks and balances to make sure that your family agrees to that bill by the funeral director, your executor or some other responsible beneficiary will sign off on the claim form agreeing to the charges. The beneficiary will then sign at the bottom saying, please send me any money that's not paying for my funeral. And in this example, it's $10,000. So $15,000 is overnighted directly to the funeral home. So there's no expense to your family. And the additional money in this example of $10,000 is overnighted directly to your named beneficiary or beneficiaries. Everybody gets their own money, and you can select one or as many beneficiaries as you want to get any excess proceeds. It's that simple. And the funeral homes are happy because they're getting paid, and your beneficiaries are happy because they got access to money to cover any additional expenses that they may have. Now, we talked about how easy this is to set up. It takes 15 minutes or less, and you either schedule a short phone call or video conference with us. If you happen to be close by, we're more than happy to meet face-to-face, but it's so easy, we can do it over the phone. What my job and the team's job is to help you determine what's the minimum amount your family's going to need. So we're not trying to put $100,000 in these policies. For most families, that's not what they need. Most families, it's $10,000, $15,000, $25,000, sometimes more. But our goal is to put the minimum amount in your beneficiary liquidity plan, not the maximum. So we help you determine that. We help you determine, out of all of your assets, where does it make sense to move that small dollar amount from your left pocket to your right pocket into your BLP. We manage that process. And then we answer any questions you have while we're on the phone or the video conference to make sure you're comfortable. And then we can complete this over the phone without needing your wet signature, because it's already your money and you're simply moving it from one account of yours to another. We can do it over the phone with our voice signature process to make it super clean, simple, and easy, and do it in less than 15 minutes. By doing this, you ensure that your legacy that you leave behind is that of composure and compassion. And more importantly, your family gets access to money that you've already earmarked for them to have, and we assure that they can get it. Now, here's some of my final thoughts. You know, when a loved one passes away, it's one of the most difficult days of a family's life. And what we've seen is typically the person that passed away had money. They thought their family was going to have access to it, but at the end of the day, they didn't have access. Now, for generations, families have figured it out without a beneficiary liquidity plan. But when you figure it out, that causes stress, arguments, and disagreements. And most people care about their beneficiaries, and they don't want it to be difficult. They don't want it to be a burden. They want it to be easy on their family and their loved ones when they pass away. And with the beneficiary liquidity plan, like we said, we take monies you're already planning on leaving for inheritance, figure out what the minimum you want them to have access to in 24 to 48 hours, and simply move it from your right pocket to your left pocket, and ensure that on one of the worst days of your family's life, the day you pass away, it's not a burden. So please, if you want to get your questions answered, if you're interested in setting up a beneficiary liquidity plan, click on the link to request our calendar or to book time directly on our calendar. We'll be more than happy to walk you through the process to ensure that you have a beneficiary liquidity plan in place for your family. Thank you.